family, we do it together. Show us we love and support each other in the community. So I ask you to God the blessing with me. Baruch, Atah, Adonai, Eloheinu, Melech, Haolam, Dayan, Amen. We learn in the book of Job about Menachem, Melech, Hishem, Barak. Lord gives, Lord takes away. But still, we thank God for all of the wonderful words of Jerry.
Ladies and gentlemen, as we begin our services, we ask that you kindly put all cell phones and electronic devices on mute. Thank you.
Rechem al banim, Richam Adonai Reav. As a father has compassion for his children, so may Adonai our God have compassion for all the family and friends of Jerry Rich who would come here to remember today. God knows how we are fashioned. God remembers that we are dust. Our days are like grass. We flourish as the flowers in the field. The wind passes over us, and we are no more. But we trust that Adonai's compassion is everlasting. God's kindness to children's children endures age after age, unchanging. We begin our service by reciting Psalms, thus linking Jerry's life to our ancient tradition, to the Jewish people, and to the eternity of God. And for the first psalm, we'll recite Psalm 121. We invite a good friend of the family, cantor Stephen Friedman.
Esa einai el harim, me'ayin yavo Ezri me'im Adonai, osei shamayim lift up my eyes to the mountain tops and ask, oh, what is the source of my help? My help, it comes from God above, who makes the heavens and the earth. Al yitein lamot raglecha, al yanum shomerecha. Hine lo yanum velo yishan shomer Yisrael. The guardian of Israel stands at your side. Our God neither slumbers nor sleeps. Adonai shomerecha, Adonai shomerecha, Adonai tzilcha yad yaminecha, Yomam hashemesh lo yakeka, ve'yom guard you from harm. God will watch over you for all time. Adonai yishmor tzeitcha, yishmor tzeitcha uvoecha, me'ata ve'ad olam, me'ata ve'ad olam, ve'ad olam.
Mizmor LeDavid, another of the Psalms of David. Adonai ro'i lo achsar bino tedeshe arbitzeni, amei menuchot inahaleni, nafshi yeshoved. Yancheni v'maglei tzedek lema'an shmo, gam ki elech begetz al mavet lo irara, ki ata imadi. Shivtecha mishaltecha hemer nachamuni, ta'aroch lefanai shulchan neged sorarai, Dishanta v'Hashem l'roshi kosi levaya, ach tov v'chesed yudafuni kol yemei chayai, v'shavti b'veit Adonai la'orech yamim. Those are the Hebrew words of Psalm 23, which we know so well from this setting. And we sometimes call it the Shepherd's Psalm. Many of you, I'm sure, know it from memory, so please recite with me. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
In synagogue on Shabbat tomorrow morning, we'll read from the third book of the Torah, the book of Leviticus, the book of Vayikra. But we know that it is already in the first book of the Torah, the book of Bereshit, of Genesis, that we learn that when a loved one passes away, it is members of the family who come forward to share stories and memories. And as that ancient tradition will continue here today as we invite up Jared's children, first Cheryl, then Debbie, and then Michael. Cheryl.
Hopefully I can do this. Hi, thank you for coming out for our dad. Please bear with me for a little while. I'd like to share a couple of stories about my dad as I remember him. Dad and I had a special bond, and I believe that it was because I inherited my mom's personality. I was his little girl. He even had a song that he used to sing to me. You're sugar and spice and everything nice. You're daddy's little girl. He even had a special nickname that he called me, Shuzzle. I believe that my sister Debbie actually gave it to me because she couldn't say Cheryl. He thought it was cute, and he adopted it, and it stuck. Dad was very disciplined and organized to the point of OCD, which was probably a result of being in the Army. Everything was neat and had a place. This was especially true of the things that he placed on his dresser. Debbie and I would take great joy in sneaking into his room and knocking down his pile of perfectly sorted and stacked change. It even became a tradition that was passed down to his grandchildren, David, Alan, and Glenn. In fact, I still did it when I was married and just came over to visit. I knew how to get under his skin. He also kept a daily calendar on his bureau, and I used to sneak in there and draw smiley faces on random dates just to drive him crazy. Dad worked hard and would relish his sleep and his nap. But as a little girl, I had a favorite game that I used to like to play with him. While he was asleep, I would go in and I opened his eyes and I would tell him, "You're not sleeping because I could see your eyes." He'd get up and play with me because he cherished his family time. As I got older, I used to go with him to silos to help him with his inventory. He could show me off to his employees, and when lunchtime came around, the two of us would go out to lunch. I would always order the biggest hoagies on the menu and then proceed to only eat 2 bites of it. He wouldn't get mad at me. He'd cut the end off and he'd bring the rest of it back to his employees. They loved it because they'd always get free lunch out of it. My dad was a great driver, and I was really scared of driving in the snow. I was a teacher for many years, so anytime there was a hint of even the little bit of flurries, I'd call him on the phone because Alec was always working, and I'd say, "Dad, I have to go to school today. Could you please drive me?" And he'd say, of course, he'd always say yes. Well, when Alec and I had children, Mom and Papa were always there for us, and the children could never do no wrong. Well, my dad was always famous for spilling something on his shirt whenever he ate. That was always expected of him. And I would never forget the time when we were having dinner at the Sage Diner. He'd finished eating, and it was probably the first time he had nothing on his shirt, and he was so proud of himself. Then he picked up his granddaughter, Sarah, because she wanted to go and sit on his lap. Well, she reached down, and she grabbed a whole handful of spaghetti, and she threw it on his clean white shirt. You should have seen the look on his face. He just laughed. He didn't get mad, because Sarah was Pop-Pop's little princess. Glenn and Pop-Pop shared a passion for the Boy Scouts, and he'd always track, push, and encourage Glenn to complete his badges and move to the next level. He would always tease Glenn that he'd achieve a higher rank until Glenn passed him and became an Eagle Scout. He used to come over to the house and wait for Glenn to come home from school so they could play backgammon. They had some epic battles with lots of happy yelling and screaming. When I would call them in for dinner, I would hear, "Just a minute," and 20 minutes later, I'd have to drag the two of them in to eat. Speaking of eating, Dad always loved his hot dogs. He would get one whenever he could. His favorite was from a deli that is long gone called Barson's. He'd always order an F7. It was a large knockwurst wrapped in bacon, with jelly mustard. He and Mom always cherished the trips that we used to eat our way down the boardwalk in Ocean City. He'd stop at almost every stall and he'd say, "Who wants an ice cream, pretzels, pizza, cookies, or candy?" He would buy it telling Mom that the grandkids wanted it. But we always knew that was a code for him getting it. He was the king of free samples. The fudge man would hide whenever he saw Dad coming. He would tell him that he needed extra, pointing to Glenn and Sarah sitting in her chair. And then he would hit him again when we walked past in the other direction, telling him he couldn't remember him. We took many fun trips with Mom and Dad. Mexico during a hurricane, Alaska freezing, Vancouver, Halifax, and Disney. And almost every year during spring break, even though we told them we couldn't go, we almost always ended up visiting them in Florida. Family was very important to Dad, and he would do anything for everyone. He was very kind, caring, and always had time for us. He was very devoted to Mom. He was the best dad and Papa. Michael and Allie were your sons. You showed your love for every time you were with us. We'll miss your hugs and your kisses. I love you with all our heart.
Please forgive me if something repeats that Cheryl has already talked about. First, I want to thank all of you for your love and support. It means so much to Mom, Cheryl, and I that you're all here with us today to remember my dad. Like many diseases, Parkinson's dementia is a terrible disease for both the patient and the family. I lost my real dad over a year ago to this disease. However, I was determined to find the good in my new dad. Over the last year and a half of him being in a memory care facility, I had many times with my new dad. We started having weekly games of checkers, where at the beginning he would always win. As time went on, I won a few, and then towards the end he couldn't win anymore. So we moved on to cards. Dad always loved going to the casinos to play poker slots. Mom hated the idea of gambling, so Dad and I had some father-daughter dates where we would go down to Atlantic City for the day. We would have lunch in a restaurant, great conversation, and then we would play poker slot. He had his monies, and when they were all used up, I snuck him more money. According to the story he told Mom, he always won. So only a few months ago, I learned how to play poker, and Dad and I, and sometimes Mike, would sit in his room to play. I would ask Dad, who has the winning hand? And even though he couldn't communicate well, up to 11 days ago, he would point to the hand that won, and he was always correct. Whenever I was ready to leave Dad for the day, I would hug and kiss him and tell him, I love you. And he always replied back, I love you more. I knew one day this would end, but again, this was what would carry me through these difficult times. So, growing up, I'm very much like my dad. We have similar personalities, and I learned most of my talents from him. One of the early memories I have was when I was quite young. Dad was mowing the lawn. So I took my little fake lawnmower, and I was mowing a lawn right with Dad. Well, Dad took his shirt off. Well, I took my shirt off. I wanted to be like him. Dad didn't mind, but when Mom found out, it didn't go so well. Many of you do not know that my dad had a terrible upbringing. He did not have the best parents, and let's just say life at home was rather difficult. Therefore, Dad entered the Army at a very young age. In fact, so young that his sister had to illegally sign as his mom and say, yes, we permit him to enter the Army. But when he was in the Army, he became very OCD about neatness, as Cheryl said, and every night he would empty the change out of his pocket and pile it, quarters, nickels, pennies, dimes. And of course, Cheryl and I used to go in and knock it over, and we taught the grandchildren to do the same thing. Mom and Dad had a storybook love affair, 68 wonderful years together. There was never a day that would go by that one would not see Mom and Dad walking hand in hand. Such a unique and perfect marriage. Or was it? You see, many years ago, my dad had a favorite contour chair. Every night he would sit in the chair relaxing. During this relaxation period, Dad would remove his wedding band, and much to Mom's disapproval, and begin to twirl and toss the ring in the air. Mom would say, Jer, you're going to lose that ring someday. And of course Dad would reply, no, I won't. Well, there was this one memorable evening when Dad was comfy in his chair and began to twirl and toss the ring. All of a sudden, tink, 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 was a deafening sound. Cheryl, Mom, and I looked at each other and froze. Dad jumped off that chair to try and save the ring from going down the heater register. Uh-oh, there she goes. Well, now the hands and knees start racing and stretching into that heater duct. This was definitely grounds for divorce. But wait, all of a sudden, Dad pulls out the wedding ring from the duct. We all breathed a huge sigh of relief, and Dad quickly placed that ring back on his finger, never to be twirled again. My dad was a very talented individual. He loved to garden. I guess that's where I learned it from. He would grow so many tomatoes that every week he would fill bags and knock on the neighbors' doors to give them tomatoes. He was also an amazing salesman. He could sell anything to anyone. Again, I learned my selling from him. Every year at the Akiba Barrack Drama Musical, Dad would sell a 50-50 raffle. He used to walk up to people and say, "Come get an arm's length worth of tickets for so many dollars." He got money from everyone because nobody wanted to cross him. Speaking of cross, Dad was a flaming redhead growing up. He had a sweet and calm demeanor until one would cross him. Then his red-hot temper would flare. Never get on Dad's bad side. Well, I definitely inherited that trait. Never cross me and get on my bad side. I was Daddy's little girl. If I were misbehaving, which rarely ever happened, my mom would say, "Wait until your father gets home." So I would wait by the front door, and as soon as he would return, I'd bat my eyes and say, "Daddy, I'm really sorry, but I wasn't good today." Then when Mom would tell him about me, he would basically blow it off. I knew how to worm my way into Dad. As most of you know, my dad had a very warped sense of humor. He would tell the same dirty jokes over and over. And of course, Mom would say, "Jer, not in front of the kids." Well, that not only went for Cheryl and I, but for the grandkids also. Dad loved to sing his army songs, and his children and grandchildren knew all the words to each of these songs. Up until a few weeks ago when I would visit with Dad, I would start to sing, "I don't want no more of army life," and Dad would be able to finish and say, "Gee, Mom, I want to go home." Amazing what a memory holds on to. Dad could never pronounce the Jewish vocabularies. So we had matzah for Passover and latkes for Hanukkah. As many times as we would correct him, he could not get it right. Then again, is it kigel or kugel? Despite Dad's rough upbringing, he did everything to overcome the negative life he had. He worked hard at being a positive man. He never complained about anything, and he always saw the best in everyone. Dad was a great father to Cheryl and I, and a wonderful pop-pop to David, Sarah, Glenn, and Alan, and eventually Emily and Tara. He would play ping pong with the boys and tell them dirty jokes, and of course sing his army songs. As we say, one's memory lives on in each generation. I am so grateful that my dad was the father he was. He was a loving father, father-in-law, husband, son, brother, and pop-pop. I will always cherish the moments we had together. I will also have the memories of playing games with him until the end. As this has been a terrible, long disease, Dad, you are now at peace and not suffering anymore. Until we meet again, I love you more.
Hello? Dad? What were you doing? Mom put a cell phone in the casket. Really? Why are you calling? You have a couple of messages yet. Okay, go on. Cheryl. He says, take a bag to the shiva so you can take leftovers home. Debbie? Hold on. If the dealer has 16, don't take a card. Mom? Will she know what that means? Hold on. He says, I love you more. Thanks, Dad. Look, just so you know, we're all okay. We're going to take good care of Mom. She'll be fine. And you just rest in peace and have a good life. Yeah, I'm the unorthodox. Which might explain why I'm a bit of the outcast of the family. But you never know what to expect. So, a couple of things, since I'm playing peanut batter here. They will overlap what Cheryl and Debbie said, but it's a little bit different angle. I come from a different angle than they do because they are the daughters. And I'm the son-in-law, for those who don't know me. I am Debbie's husband. It's not how you start, it's how you finish. If there was ever a poster child for this well-known phrase, it's my second dad, Jerry. Most of you know how he finished, but not how he started. Allow me to fill in a few blanks. Dad grew up in Philadelphia with his parents and older sister Florence. Life became problematic in his teens to the point where at age 17, he felt unsafe at home. With little to his name and few life skills, he left to enlist in the Army. But being 17, he knew he was a year shy of eligibility. Knowing that returning home was never going to be an option, and that his parents would not sign for him, he convinced Florence to forge their mother's name on the Army documents for him to enlist. Debbie and I spoke to Dad a few months ago about his service, and he told us he was stationed at Fort Drum, New York, and Fort Dix right here in New Jersey. And that as an Army clerk, his primary job was to complete the paperwork required for U.S. servicemen leaving for Korea. Dad was very proud of his years in the service, which, as Gloria told me, he recited as 3 years, 3 months, and 29 days. Knowing Dad, I thought he'd know the hours and the seconds too, but okay. He always spoke of his time in the Army with pride, including some stories and songs that cannot be repeated. Using his expertise in math, as well as in the computation of gambling odds, Dad taught himself to be an expert poker player. He hustled his Army colleagues in order to earn some spending money for entertainment, and of course for dates. My understanding is that in his youth, he was quite the ladies' man. Somehow, I don't doubt that. He had striking, gleaming eyes, an infectious smile, and an incredible sense of humor. All the traits needed to attract the pretty girls he dated. But then something different happened. An attractive 17-year-old girl caught his attention. As Debbie already explained, actually Debbie did not explain this, sorry. He met her on a double date. But she was not his date. He was on the double date with a different girl. It was his buddy's date who caught his eye. What's he going to do? Waited Dad figured it out immediately. Deep six the buddy and take the girl. The girl became permanent. The buddy never spoke to him again. It appears to have been a good trade-off, because he and Mom became engaged, and a year later, in 1954, they married. He was just 21, and she was just 19. And 68 years later, here we are. As I thought about how to sum up Dad's life in a short eulogy, what came to mind was how he became the boisterous and loving family man we all knew. He was always telling jokes, pulling pranks. He absolutely loved playing with little kids, especially his 4 grandchildren. How did this happen, given the life start he had? Dad had a choice when he got to the fork in the road. He could choose to continue the life he led growing up, or he could take the other fork and try and create the life he never had. By now, all of us who knew him are well aware what fork in the road he chose. Yet I also have to believe that Mom's extended family no doubt played a part. She always had a large and very close-knit family, something that was a big void in Dad's life prior to becoming a part of Mom's. Her family set the example of what family should be, and as they brought Jerry into their fold, he embraced it. But in the end, it was Dad's desire to make that bold decision at that fork in the road, taking the chance that he could beat the odds and create the life he never had. For he knew there was more out there than what he experienced as a youth. There's absolutely no question that the first step after taking that fork was choosing Mom. Both he and Mom lived a very happy and satisfying life. They worked hard. They saved their money. They bought a house, all while raising 2 little girls. 2 homes later, they ended up in Cherry Hill. And that's where Alec and I came into the picture. Dad loved Alec's and my sharp wit. It was similar to his own. Alec and I always tried to outsmart Dad, most often to no avail. He was just that good. Some of the antics we all experienced over the years have already been mentioned by Cheryl and Debbie, but trust that there are many more too numerous to mention here. Recalling some of them when we met with Rabbi Peltz earlier this week brought the family joy at a dark period in our lives. Having harassed Dad for over 40 years with jokes, tricks, and teasing, there are many more stories Alec and I could tell, most not particularly suitable for this fine establishment. If by any chance I piqued your curiosity, feel free to join us at the show. As everyone knows, Mom and Dad have 2 girls. A mother and her daughters have a unique female bond. But a dad and his daughters have that special protective bond that is unlike any other. So as I started to write this eulogy, it crossed my mind what Dad must have been thinking when 2 hormonal young men, one after the other, came for his daughters. He didn't even question us about our intentions, perhaps because he didn't really want the answers. Or did he just like and trust Alec and I that much? Or perhaps he was just happy to get the girls out of the house. Truth be known, both Alec and I were welcomed into their home and happily became part of their very entertaining extended family. Those weekly Sunday night dinners at the Rich home with all 6 of us will be etched in my mind forever. One never knew what would come out of Dad's mouth on any given night, nor how red Mom's face would get, depending on what came out of that mouth. Alec and I have known each other since we were 13, long before we were lucky enough to have Cheryl and Debbie come into our lives. Very often prior to those Sunday night dinners, Alec and I would conspire on how we were going to tease Dad at the dinner table that evening. Between all of us, we generated endless laughter, and Dad was always a good sport, taking it all, but also dishing it out. How I miss those times, but thank you, Dad, for providing the joy that we recall fondly, and for providing memories that will stay with us forever. Over the many years, there were also lots of big family gatherings for birthdays, holidays, and just for no reason. Lots of food, fun, and Dad's old jokes, which he insisted on repeating at every gathering, despite all of us having heard them over and over numerous times previously. We rolled our eyes, Gloria kicked them under the table, others just shook their heads. We knew his repertoire by heart, as well as all punchlines. But now, what wouldn't we give to hear him tell all those jokes just one more time? And to hear that loud and hearty laugh of his, and that smirk of love on his face every time he looked at Gloria, and that hand-holding every time he and she were together. I will miss all this. Gloria will miss all this. Debbie, Cheryl, Alec, and his grandchildren will also miss this. And the rest of you who are here watching today likely have your own stories about Dad that you too will miss. Extraordinary stories from a guy who thought himself as just an ordinary person who just happened to be smart enough to have made the right life choices at a young age in order to build a wonderful and enduring family life. Dad, you were far, far from ordinary. From a very rough early start, you somehow learned and understood what it would take to create a stable, loving, and fun home life. With you and Gloria guiding and supporting each other along the way, you both made it work. And as the 2 of you approach mid and later life, you added both domestic and world travelers, by yourselves or with your children, as well as winters in Florida with your friends. You, Dad, went from 0 to 100 in 68 years. Who would have ever thought that was possible? Even though we never realized it, Dad taught us all a life lesson. Trust your judgment. Use your innate skills. Choose the right partner. Make smart decisions together. Live your life with high morals, ethics, and honesty, and you can overcome adversity. We will all miss Dad. But once again, it's not how you start, it's how you finish. And Dad, you crossed the finish line in first place.
Thank you, Cheryl and Debbie and Mike, for sharing those beautiful stories and memories and reflections about Jerry. As I reflected on our talk the other day, a discussion that included tears but also much laughter, I was reminded of a verse from Psalms that we had said in services that morning that Jerry passed away. You see, that day on the Hebrew calendar was Rosh Chodesh Iyar, the beginning of the Hebrew month of Iyar. And one of the ways that we celebrate this new month is by reciting Hallel, a collection of psalms that praise God. And one of those psalms says, Zeh hayom aseh Adonai nagila v'nismecha bo. Today is the day that God has made. Let us rejoice and be happy in it. Though today, we of course are very saddened by Jerry's loss. We're also comforted by the way he lived, especially after the challenges he experienced at the beginning. As Mike said, Jerry decided to live his life with joy and with happiness. Nagila v'nismecha bo. He made his days, and all of your days, joyful and happy. And of course, as we heard, he did this first and foremost with his family, with Gloria for 68 years of marriage, Cheryl and Alec and Debbie and Michael, and his grandchildren, David and Alan and Emily, and Sarah and Glenn and Tara, as well as for Steve and Sherry, and Jack and Candy, and many other dear family members and friends. Despite our tears, when we reflect on Jerry's life, we are grateful for the jokes, the laughter, the same jokes again, and all the happiness and joy that he brought to so many people throughout his life. Cheryl, Debbie, and Michael, you painted a beautiful picture of your father's life, his challenges, his accomplishments, and the impact that he made on all of you. And since you all told the story of Jerry's life so well, I'm not going to retell it here. But I would like to highlight a few moments and add in a few other memories that others shared that help us see how he lived Nagila v'nismecha bo. And the most important place to start is with you, Gloria. Debbie and Michael shared about how you met, and you summed it up the other day when we were talking, when you said that Jerry was just a good salesman, and he sold himself to you. But you found him to be very caring, outgoing, and good-natured. And you started dating, and your relationship grew. And on March 21st, 1954, you were married. And you know that when you stood under that chuppah to be married, I'm sure what was recited for you were the Sheva Brachot, the 7 blessings of joy that we recite at a wedding. And in 2 of those blessings, we pray that the couple becomes Ra'im Ahuvim, beloved companions. Gloria, you and Jerry were partners in raising a family together and building a life together for 68 years of marriage. You brought each other and your whole family so much joy and happiness. That blessing that was recited under your chuppah was certainly fulfilled. After you were married, you lived in the Northeast and eventually moved to Pennsauken, then Willingboro, then Cherry Hill. And in all of those places, Jerry brought joy and happiness. Everyone agreed, as we heard, that Jerry was a jokester. He loved telling jokes and the same ones over and over. And David, you said that your pop had to tell a joke 3 times or else it wouldn't count. And Debbie, you also shared how your dad could never keep a secret. And you shared one very cute story about this. When you were a little girl, Hanukkah was coming, and you kept pestering your dad to tell you what he got you for Hanukkah. And he told you, all right, I'll tell you, but you can't tell anybody. They got you a Barbie house. And then you set out to find it in your house because you couldn't wait till Hanukkah to get it. And you did find it in their closet, and you played with it over and over again. And then when Hanukkah came, you're excited to be able to open it up and keep playing with it, but it wasn't there. What happened to it? Well, it turns out Jerry forgot to give it to you. Fortunately, you're able to remind him and able to play with that all together. But of course, to play with it, he had to put it together. So to do that, Jerry took out his favorite tool, a hammer. Alec, you said that Jerry thought anything could be fixed with a hammer. Though you might not think of it from this description, Jerry was actually pretty handy. In addition to his vegetable garden that he cultivated, he was also good at hanging wallpaper and painting. But as we heard from Mike, what was most important to Jerry was not what on the walls, but what happened in his home. That it was a warm, welcoming, and joyous place. That's what Mike and Alec found when they entered the family, as they were immediately welcomed in. And Gloria, you said that you were the sons, that Alec and Mike were the sons that you and Jerry never had. And you all enjoyed spending wonderful moments and days together. Nagila b'nismachavo. And as much as Jerry loved his kids, he truly adored his grandchildren. And they adored their Pop-Pop. Though Pop-Pop was not his first choice of name. Originally, he wanted his grandchildren to call him Sir Jerry. But it never caught on for some reason. But Alan said that his Pop-Pop was the fun grandparent. No offense, Gloria. He had a giant rubber band gun that he called the Uzi that they would shoot despite Gloria's pleas to be careful. And Jerry also started his games with them by saying, "Let's have fun. Just don't tell Mama." Glenn, you also recalled the jokes and the army songs that your Pop-Pop would share that weren't so appropriate for children, but boy, were they fun too. And Jerry loved playing games with his grandkids, ping pong, pool, chess, checkers, craps, blackjack and others. And Alan also shared how Jerry got the kids to go on walks with him and Gloria. See, Jerry and Gloria loved taking walks around their neighborhood, but as often is the case, the kids were not really in the mood for taking a walk. They'd rather stay home and play on the computer. So Jerry told them that whenever he and Mom walked around the neighborhood, they would find money. $10 bills, even $20 bills on the route. Well, that got them to come. Though they looked down the entire way, you found some coins, quarters or pennies, which it turns out Jerry had planted to make sure you kept coming on those walks. And you also loved playing on Jerry's computer. He was one of the first people who had one, which is because he needed it for selling insurance. But all the grandkids loved playing the games on it, and he was happy to let them. And Jerry, of course, had a very close relationship with Sarah, his pride and joy, you said. She could truly do no wrong in his eyes. Nagila b'nismachavo. Jerry shared many days of joy and happiness with his grandchildren. As we heard, Jerry had a big personality, and this helped him professionally as a salesman. He sold appliances at Silos for years and also worked selling insurance for Prudential. Later in life, after he retired, he actually went back to selling appliances at Sears and Lowe's and Home Depot because he just loved it. Jerry was a lifelong devotee to Dale Carnegie and was always able to make friends that influenced people wherever he went. He also helped others do this too, like when David went to work at electronics stores. Jerry taught him how to sell the service policies, which apparently is where the real money is. And Debbie said he was great at selling raffle tickets at the plays, too. Jerry also loved spending time in Ocean City, walking the boardwalk, and collecting those free samples, especially pens. He had a whole basket of pens. And he also loved getting Alan, David, Glenn, and Sarah as many dinner rolls as they could eat. David said that his parents limited their dinner roll intake, so Jerry made sure to circumvent the system and kept them coming. If it made his grandkids happy, then Jerry was happy to make it happen. As we heard, Jerry had his challenges throughout his life, and the last year and a half was particularly difficult. But you were all there for him, to give him all the love and care that you could possibly give. And this, too, is part of Jerry's legacy. His love and his kindness for others, the joy that he brought them, set an example that allowed you to give it right back. This, too, is a blessing. That we all feel the sadness of Jerry's loss. Today we are comforted by all the happiness, love, laughter, and joy that he brought to all of you and to so many others throughout his life. And this is how we know that Jerry's memory will always be for a blessing for all the days to come. We rise for a final prayer.
Good בסתר כנפיך העולמים. בצרור החיים את נשמתו, אדוני הוא נחלתו. ינוח בשלום על משכבו, ונאמר אמן.
Exalted, compassionate God, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and the pure, to the soul of Jerry Leon Rich, who has gone to his eternal home. Merciful One, we ask our loved one find perfect peace in your eternal embrace. May his soul be bound up in the bond of life. May he rest in peace, and let us say, Amen. You may be seated. From here, we'll head to Crescent Memorial Park for the burial. After that, the family will be receiving comforters at Debbie and Michael's home, 126 Renaissance Drive in Siena and Cherry Hill. There will also be Shiva Minyanim there Sunday through Wednesday evenings next week at 7:30 p.m., and vaccinations and masks are requested for coming to visit the Shiva.
Can we have the pallbearers to the center aisle, please? I'm going to ask if we can rise once more as well.
For everything there's a season, a time for every experience under heaven. The time to be born and a time to die. The time to plant and the time to uproot. The time to tear down and the time to build up. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to grieve and a time to dance. A time to throw stones and a time to gather. A time to embrace and a time to refrain. A time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to let go, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak.